The offense just got to do better.
This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tanisha Batiste. Alongside me are Jarvis Davis, Aaron Freeman, and Tori McElhaney. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. The Atlanta Football Party is also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the Falcons defense, for the most part, did what it came to do in the season opener, but the offense, not so much. So let's just get right into it and talk about what we thought would happen and what actually did, and the fact that they were not the same thing. So you guys know the anticipation in the offseason for what the Falcons offense would be able to do was way up, but there was a bit of a letdown with the team managing just 226 yards of total offense. And I thought that, Tori, the way that you put it in your article was really great because you said it was perception versus reality. So I kind of want to start building on that. The Falcons had 175 yards of offense and 10 points in the first half. They had 51 yards of total offense, 0 points for the Falcons in the second half. So first off, Tori, what happened in a game that saw Kirk Cousins throw for just 155 yards, a couple of picks, and Drake London and Kyle Pitts just combined for 5 catches and 41 yards?
Yeah, I'll go to the point about perception versus reality. The perception of this offense was that it is expected to be a top 10 offense in the NFL this year. With the star power that it has, with Kirk Cousins operating in the pocket, with a returning offensive line where you have all 5 guys returning from 2023, that first off, that never happens at any level.
Yeah.
Hardly ever. And then you have Bijan, Tyler Algier, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Darnell Mooney. You have all these weapons. You have Kirk Cousins who can get them the ball. This should be a good offense.
Yeah.
And Kirk Cousins talks about this in training camp. He was like, the perception of this offense is that we're a really, really good group. We really are. Yeah. But until we go out and prove that, until reality becomes that, then this assumption means nothing. And last night, unfortunately for the Falcons offense, proved what he was saying, that all of this conjecture, all this projecting, predictions, all of it means nothing if when you don't put the ball down, you can't score or move the ball. And I think my biggest issue, and this is something Kirk Cousins talked about after the game, something Raheem Morris did, it's something players in the locker room did. It's like the problem, a lot of the problems of this offense was based in these like self-inflicted wounds of turnovers, ill-timed penalties. We can talk all day long about TJ Watt and kind of the game wrecker that he was, but you knew that going in. You knew that he was going to be a problem. So you have to try and counteract that somewhere else. And there really wasn't any counteracting from what I felt like I saw. Now, I say all this to say that I haven't gone back and watched the tape. I haven't gone back and watched all 22. I'm just going off of like the game ended like 16 hours ago.
Yeah.
So just initial reaction to it. But it was a very, very disappointing day for the offense that I think caught a lot of people off guard. And I would say probably even the people who are a part of that offense.
Yeah.
They expected a lot more too.
I think so. And Tori, you make a great point about the perception versus reality and also expectations, because yes, we all knew 90 was going to be 90. And for me, it was at halftime, I was thinking, okay, they're going to go try to solve 90. They're going to try to solve 90. And we never saw that in the second half. But for you, Jarvis, when you look at that, or even when you look on the other side where you're looking at the ground game that we also expected to see a lot of success there, we only saw the Falcons gain 89 yards on the ground. So you kind of look at it from that perspective too, not just what went wrong in the passing game, but what wasn't as effective as you wanted it to be in the run game too.
I mean, I talked about this before the show, and I think that just from a run game perspective, we saw some success in that first drive, the opening drive, and that last drive going into halftime. That's when you saw guys like I got a chance to go back and check out not all 22, but like look at the condensed version of the game and just really focus in on the offensive line. They were moving guys off the ball. I'm talking about Pittsburgh didn't. It was almost like they didn't know they had a game or they hadn't had any preseason snaps. I know we're gonna talk about that a little bit later, but when you think about it from that aspect of it, like the offensive line of Chris Lindstrom, Drew Dalman, all those guys, all the matchups we talked about, Drew Dalman, Aaron and I, about having to go up against Keanu Benton and how he was going to be a task. Like they were moving those guys off the ball, and then you start to slowly see it start to change a little bit. And I feel like there was a time where T.J. Watt was being let go. He was just being let go, and I talked about how that's the guy that you need to make sure he's accounted for. You have a tight end try to cut him off on that backside, because a lot of times 9 times out of 10 he's going to make that play. Now they able to get away with it early on, but when they started making those adjustments and they start leaving 9-0 unblocked, he was coming down making that tackle pretty consistently. So I think just overall you saw them come out strong and you saw them finish the half strong. And it just seemed like outside of that, they just didn't have an answer at all. And I just felt like one of the things that I thought was kind of another revelation I had, just going back and watching the game, it's just like it's so easy to hit a target that's not moving, right? Like you can, if you know where that target is going to be every time. I'm telling you, from a defensive lineman aspect, you know how to rush, you know where you're going, and you know that all you got to do is keep coming, because hey, if I like my secondary versus your wide receiver group, I know that I got at least an extra half a second or a second. And I feel like Kirk was just a statue. Reason why this stands out to me even more, look at the touchdown pass. He was able to get out of the pocket, and it was like Pittsburgh didn't even know he could move. They was like, oh, okay, all right, wow, he can move around a little bit. So, and that's the reason why I think that's the biggest issue for me. Like you talk about, play action, you talk about pre-snap motion. They used a little bit and they had some success with it, specifically in the run game early on, like I mentioned. But when you just have Kurt just standing back there and he's not going to move, he's not going to flinch and try to get out of pocket or try to extend the play. You know exactly what he's going to be from a defensive lineman standpoint. I know I'm going to eat, because, hey, I know if I could beat that man in front of me 5 times out of 7, or 6 times out of 10, I know that I'm going to get there, because I know exactly where he's going to be before snap.
And speaking of that, Aaron, we can't leave the loss at the feet of the players only. So what do you think about that Zach Robinson game plan that, among other things, saw 22 snaps out of the shotgun for Kirk Cousins, when you look back, I saw a stat that said he only ever took a max of 10 in a game in his career. That's just kind of one aspect of it. But I know you had thoughts 16 hours ago about Zach Robinson's game plan. What are your thoughts now?
Yeah, it's I'm at a loss for words. I thought it was a highly questionable game plan. You talk about sort of the usage of the shotgun, usage of the pistol, and when you go back and you look at sort of how often they threw the ball out of shotgun and how often they ran the ball out of pistol, it became very predictable in what they were doing just based off of formation. That probably, as Jarvis is talking about, like the Falcons' 2 best drives came at the very beginning of the game when Pittsburgh didn't really know what was coming and they had to make that adjustment, and then came at the end of the second half when they were much more in that sort of 4-minute offense. And so we're doing things differently. But outside of that, it seemed like Pittsburgh kind of figured out what the Falcons were doing offensively, and maybe some of that, if not all of that, maybe owed to the fact that they figured out pretty quickly, when Kirk is in shotgun, they're going to throw it, and when Kirk is in pistol, they're going to run the football. And on top of that, to not have a single snap of play action, to me, is just unheard of in the NFL, right? That when you look at Kirk's or the Vikings play action use last year, the last couple of years with Kirk, they were like top 3 in the NFL, only behind basically, I think, the Falcons and maybe one other team that I'm blanking on. And it was just like, you would expect a high degree of play action passing, because that's something that Kirk did really well in Minnesota these last couple of years. And maybe some of that is owed to concerns about the mobility. But you can run play action out of shotgun. You can run play action out of pistol. I don't know if the Falcons not using play action is because Kirk can't move. It's just they just chose not to use play action, which it just to me is a baffling decision at this level to, just show your hand so often as the Falcons did in that game.
Something that I want to add too about this whole, because I'm seeing so much about like Kirk's health.
Yeah.
And how it's connected to the reason why they were running out of pistol and shotgun. To me, that doesn't necessarily correlate, because the whole point of pistol and shotgun is not necessarily like Kirk's own mobility. It's where the running back's aligning. So like that argument, to me, is kind of off base. It's more about like the lack of play action. It's more about kind of like the decisions of what Zach Robinson was putting on Kirk Cousins. It's like, I don't think that to me, it was less about like health of Kirk Cousins and more about like scheme decisions. I feel like I'm not making sense, but that's
actually you're making perfect sense, T, because I read some of that as well. And I'm thinking, well, no, because we did see, to Jarvis's earlier point as well, we saw success when play action happened. So it did happen in the game. It just needed to happen a little bit more. So I think you're onto something. I think JD is onto something as well. You can't kind of leave it at the feet of just his health being the question mark.
I just want to kind of just add to what Free was saying as well. But like, if you just look at that game, those linebackers were flying up when Kurt was turning around and that ball off. I'm just like, man, if y'all just do it one time, one time, stick it in his stomach, pull that bad boy out. I'm from quick read. I'm telling you, hit Kyle Pitts. As a matter of fact, on the interception, I think it was the first interception of the game. Kyle Pitts literally ran past the linebackers, and both of them, they were in zone. Both of them just like this, still looking at Kurt. I was like, you got a 6'6", 240-pound doggone dude running down the middle of the field, wide open, unaccounted for. Now, granted, Kyle Pitts probably should have tried to anchor down a little bit, settle down a little bit and show him his numbers. Yeah, he didn't do that. But I'm just saying, like, when you have those guys, I'm telling you, I've never seen linebackers like that locked in on the running game and not have to be held accountable for it when play action comes. I just don't understand, because that's just football 101. When you got those, that's the whole point of the running game, right? To be able to, hit a big play when those guys think you're going to run the football, and your wide receivers can get open, they have more. There's more of a percentage of them being open when you run play action. And just like Free mentioned, Minnesota had a lot of success with it. Kurt was on a MVP type run before he got hurt last year. So you understand what he does best. He's good when he does that as well. So that's why it's kind of frustrating when you go through a game like this and you have your defense in a spot where they don't give up a touchdown, 6 field goals. Yeah, like Arthur Smith's offenses averaged 19 points a game, 18 points a game, never 20 points a game. And we sitting up here talking about a loss with all of what Torrey laid out coming into the season. We're talking about a loss, and they scored 18 points. Yeah, man, it's a problem, Jack, like from the top on down.
Well, the Falcons defense fared a little bit better because we feel like for the most part they did what they came to do. We'll debrief on it in under further review. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by PrizePicks. So PrizePicks, of course, is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is also the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Also, you can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks, and it's the best way to get action on sports in most states, including California, Texas, and right here in Georgia. Also, PrizePicks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. So download the Prize Packs app today and use code Locked On NFL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code Locked On NFL on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. This Atlanta football party is also brought to you by BetterHelp. Now, I know that a lot of you might need a little bit of a hug today because of what happened on Sunday, and hopefully we won't be having this conversation next week. But ultimately speaking, as tough as yesterday was for us with the Falcons, there are a lot of other things sometimes that really weigh us down in life when we have to adult. So you think about this, your kids, they're always doing the most. And one thing you want to learn is how you can do things for yourself. Gardening may be something you want to do. Getting out and walking may be something you want to do. And how do you get that done? Probably focusing on your mental. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/locked-on today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked-on. All right, guys, let's go to a little bit more of a happy place. Aaron, Jimmy Lake's defense, as Jarvis mentioned, held the Steelers to all field goals in just 2 drives that got inside the red zone. What do you think of the game plan Lake prepared overall?
I'd say overall it was solid. I think I could probably nitpick, as I often do, in terms of maybe they could have done a better job, stopping the run and, limiting the time of possession that the Steelers overwhelmingly had in this game. But I think overall the Falcons knew Pittsburgh was going to come in here and run the football. And I think they did what they needed to do in order to slow that down. Again, they could do a better job executing in terms of getting off blocks, making tackles, all those various things that, the players on the field have to do. But as far as Jimmy Lake is concerned, I think he put together a game plan that was designed to deal with this Steelers offense. And I think for the most part, besides those nitpicks in terms of maybe they make that tackle instead of a 7-yard gain, that's a 4-yard gain or those types of things, I think they were able to execute it.
How about you, Jarvis? What are your thoughts on Lake's plan, his game plan for the first game of the season?
I mean, I thought it was pretty generic, and to be able to, say something like that and not allow any touchdowns, I feel like you're in a pretty good spot when you think about it from that standpoint. Because I think that, you saw Justin Simmons kind of get off to a little bit of a slow start, but then he come up with the big, PBU on, and then you see Judon, you get the half a sack, with Grady late in the game. So you start to see some of those late additions start to come around late in the game, which is understandable, right? Because they come in late. You understand like their acclimation to the defense, and there's still some of that going on. So I get that aspect of it, but I think overall I thought it was fine. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more pressure from Lake. I think they kind of went with the whole, hey, we're just going to rush forward. We're going to make sure we stay in our lanes. And obviously there was a couple of breakdowns. We had an issue one time with Grady. He kind of got out of his lane, and then, Justin Fields was able to break and go pick up a first down. And then there was just one instance where I felt like, and I think people can speak to this as far as overall, I think AJ Terrell didn't have his best game because it was just some weird type situations going on, and specifically on that play when right before half when they threw the ball to George Pickens, and he kind of did like this whole kind of half rollout throwback situation. Oh, move in the pocket. Imagine that concept. So when you think about that particular play, they were in cover 2. AJ Terrell was sitting right there in this. He got his little area, right? But a lot of times when you're in cover 2, a lot of times the corner can help the safety out so much. If there's nobody threatening your area, you're just guarding grass at this point. So you need to sink and continue to fall back, because what that's going to do is that's going to help. It's going to make a more difficult throw for a guy like Justin Fields, because he's throwing it back across the field. So, and you got Jesse Bates over there. So if you make him throw that ball a little bit higher, try to put a little bit more arc on it, you're pretty much setting up Jesse Bates to come over to try to get that interception. And I think that those are the type of things that I feel like that defense went from having a solid game to, hey, maybe getting a turnover to help the offense out so they can get some momentum so they can get in the end zone again, and then you possibly win the game. Now, from those, you can say that's high standards, but my expectations are really high for this defense because, like I said, we haven't had a pass rush in forever. They got it in here. They got the secondary to do it.
Yeah.
Those guys just got to go out there and execute just a little bit more. I'm talking about game-changing type plays, and I feel like that was probably an opportunity that they had one, but they missed out on it.
Well, Tori, let me ask you this, since we kind of think from Jimmy Lake's perspective, it was a solid game plan, if you will. So when you look at the defense holding the Steelers to 6 field goals, 2 drives that got inside the red zone but didn't produce touchdowns, you kind of look at the defense and you do say, yeah, it was kind of it was a defense that was kind of being put together, if you will, kind of at that last minute because of the additions of Judon and Simmons late. But when you look at the performances overall from the defense, kind of who stood out for you and kind of what did you see from that defense that encourages you that, hey, they're going to be a defense to be reckoned with as we move through the season?
Yeah, I think that we got to see, to Jarvis's point, that that Justin Simmons and Matthew Judon kind of came more alive in the second half. And I think there is something to be said about the fact that this game, again, to use Jarvis's word, like a generic type of game plan. I think in week 1, when you're going back and forth, if it's going to be Russ or it's going to be Justin Fields, like I'm kind of okay with that. I'm kind of okay with not showing everything and still going out there and playing a solid game where you don't allow a touchdown. Like I can nitpick all day long. Same thing as Aaron. Like, and I guarantee you this defense is going to do the same thing. They want to stop the run. They want to get their hands on balls, like, and those things didn't happen. So it went from a solid performance to wanting more of that flash. And I do think in time we'll get that. So I say all that to say too, that there were some instances and moments where I thought Justin Simmons did some good things. He got a hand on a ball on a third and long pass, which I thought was really good. Obviously Matthew Judon making Justin Fields a bit more uncomfortable in that second half. I thought the fact that Grady Jarrett came out after everything that he's gone through to get to this point and play to the level that he did was something to be admired. And I'm kind of mad that the offensive performance of this team and the loss is going to overshadow like the story of Grady Jarrett for this game 1. I'll say this. I really liked what I saw from Nate Landman. He is someone who has not been he's been injured with the quad, kind of soft tissue. They've been being conservative with him, trying to work him back. And so I didn't necessarily know how much we were going to see of him yesterday. And I thought the way that they used him was very indicative of playing to the strengths of their guys. Troy Anderson is a guy who we saw time and time again. He can run sideline to sideline. His speed and quickness and just honestly, sometimes you forget that he is the size that he is because of how quickly he moves. Nate Landman's your thumper for when you know that you just need a stop, like what you saw on the 2-3 yard line and blew up that 4th and 1 play because he recognized what they were doing and just said, screw it. Like, here I go. And I think that is something that I'm to go back to the original point that I was making of like generic versus flashy and wanting to see more of that flash. I do think that you have the pieces to be able to create something flashy, and that the longer this thing goes, the more flashy it's going to get. And the more blitz packages I think Jimmy Lake will feel comfortable enacting. And I just think that what we saw from this defense was a very, very good first step. Yeah. But I think there are so many more steps ahead. And I know I'm pretty excited to see where this defense goes. The one thing I will say is I need them to like contain the pocket. I feel like there were too many things that were leaking out, whether it be Justin Fields or Najee Harris in the run game. There was too much leaking. I think as soon as they kind of create this pocket where you can't really escape it, that's going to be a game changer for this group.
Indeed. And we'll talk about a mental reset amongst the players, the coaches, and fans to get them where they need to be come next Monday in What's Next. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by GameTime. So when you think about how you want to kind of approach this season, right? And you think about getting tickets for games because those Falcons tickets are pretty much sold out for the season, you might want to pick up GameTime, which has a new feature called GameTime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Hey, Ursher, he's coming to town too. You might want to check out GameTime because they also have tickets for concerts as well as comedy and theater. And the seat view is pretty cool because you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. And of course, the lowest price guarantee or GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference. So download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONFL. Let me repeat that for you. LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. I feel like I'm saying the Usher Raymond thing. But anyway, Game Time ticket coverage also gives you purchase that's covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So download that Game Time app today because what time is it? It's game time. Locked On Sports Today is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel and is programmed to bring you the biggest stories daily without all the noise. Locked On Sports Today also brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, JD, one of the things that Tori mentioned earlier was that commentary that you're kind of seeing on social media about Kirk Cousins and whether or not he's really 100% healthy. Another commentary that you kind of saw out there as well was, maybe you should have played the starters in the preseason. So a lot of players spoke out post-game, Kirk Cousins included, and said that they didn't necessarily feel there's a correlation between how they performed Sunday and not playing in the preseason games. Raheem Morris echoed that sentiment. But do you feel that many of the Falcons starters not playing in the preseason impacted this game?
That's kind of hard question. That's a kind of hard question for me to ask, T, because here's why. Because I've always believed like you get better by playing real live football. The only way you can get better by playing real live football is playing real live football. And I just never been a proponent of, hey man, I'm tagging you out. So yeah, that's gonna be able to get me to a point where I'm ready to go knock somebody behind in the dirt. It's hard for me to subscribe to that. So, but I do also get the aspect of, hey, I'm trying to make sure people don't get injured. I get that. That if that's what your sole reasoning is, I get it. I understand it. And I'm not going to necessarily question it. But when you're talking about this offense and the way it came out, it looks sloppy. You're talking about penalties, Kirk throwing all these interceptions, drop interceptions. There were 2 strip sacks, negated by penalties. if we're talking about those penalties not happening, and you talking about we're not talking about wrecking shop. We're talking about TJ Watt won that game for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So for me, it's hard not to look at that and say, why y'all look so sloppy in the first game of the season? So the only thing I can look at and say, hey man, preseason, baby, and Raheem Morris even mentioned in the post game, he's like, you talking about 10 snaps potentially. Well, maybe that 10 snaps probably would have helped out some because you got a guy coming off of Achilles injury and, trying to get back in the groove of things. He hadn't played since week 8 of 2023. It's hard not to look at it and say, maybe that's it.
Here's the thing. Y'all know how I feel about the preseason. Yes, I hate it. I hate it. Yes. And here's the thing is I truly, because of how much I dislike the preseason, was looking for any type of excuse to give as to like, oh, it didn't matter that they didn't play in the preseason. I still subscribe to not liking the preseason. However, this offense didn't help me at all. And that's they didn't really do anything to go against the argument that the preseason reps like do or don't matter. Like if anything, they did the opposite. The only thing that I can kind of hold on to And I know we can go in circles talking about preseason, and a lot of people have big opinions on it, and that's fine. They can have big opinions on it. I have a big opinion where I don't like it. So all I will say is that it's not like we saw this offense come out in the first half stagnant. This offensive issues, when you're talking about that first drive, no, they didn't score a touchdown. I'm okay with that. But they were moving the ball. To Jarvis's point earlier, they were moving the ball. They had a lot of different things that they were doing, a lot of different motions. Tyler Algier got the ball. Bijan
personnel.
Yeah, it was. So that's what you go into the game, and it's like scripted up. And then you talk about like that final like 3-minute drill end of half where they do score a touchdown. It's like, okay, that's good. That's what my problem wasn't that to me shows that like, no, they didn't really need the preseason. This whole argument about the preseason reps, it's like they came out in the first half and moved the ball well. I just like, I feel like I'm on kind of like a loop with this. The problems were in the second half when you start turning the ball over and there are these ill-timed penalties, and then you kind of start talking about scheme, and it's like, how much did Pittsburgh actually look at what the Falcons were doing in the first half and account for it in the second half to better attack it? So that, to me, you don't get that in the preseason either, because you're talking about playing Kirk Cousins if you're going to play him for 2 series.
Game plans. Yeah.
Like you're talking about a 4-quarter game, where in the preseason you're talking about a couple series. So that whole argument to me, even though the offense did not do anything, in my opinion, to help me with this argument, like, at the end of the day, like I don't subscribe to it. I don't.
I'll say this, Tory's agenda, I love it. I love the anti-preseason agenda. I'm old school like Jarvis. I believe that you should play football to get better at football. But I think ultimately you got to ask your question. What were the issues that the Falcons had, right? I think you can say, yes, preseason could have helped, because when you look at the receiver and the quarterback not necessarily being on the same page, more snaps in the preseason could benefit that. But going back to what we were talking about earlier with the offense, like, preseason isn't going to solve not having play action in the offense. Preseason isn't going to solve your TJ Watt problem, right? Like, Caleb McGarry playing against backup off defensive linemen in the preseason is not going to help him block TJ Watt. And so, like, to me, a lot of the issues that the Falcons had in this game, despite my agenda of being very much pro preseason, like, I don't think if you're looking at those issues, you're like, oh, preseason would have solved these problems. Just playing 10 more snaps, 20 more snaps, 100 more snaps would have solved those problems. So I don't really buy into the whole, hey, if they had played in the preseason, they would have looked better. Maybe they would have been a little bit better running the football. Maybe the passing game would have looked a little bit more in sync. But I think a lot of the issues that they had in those areas had less to do with, hey, we haven't played enough snaps in the preseason and we're not ready for the season, as Tori pointed out. I just think, once you got into the game, you weren't executing, you weren't making the in-game adjustments and all that. And playing in the preseason, I don't think solves those problems.
Indeed. All right, guys, a little bit of rapid fire so we can end on a positive note, because another one of those things that we heard out there in social media, oh God, it feels like the last 3 years all over again, people were triggered. So help the fan base not to be triggered and help them to see that this loss was not a repeat of anything that they saw for the last 3 years, and that this team is going to reset and be what we think they can be. So, and on a positive note, real quick.
Look at the defense. They did not give up a touchdown. They played a pretty generic, solid game plan, right? Nothing fancy, exotic blitzes, none like that. And they were able to hold the team to no touchdowns in an NFL football game. So, yeah, and they're only going to get better from here as long as everybody stays healthy.
The only direction is up. That's it.
Yeah. Let's see. My thing is, I think this team I think, has a lot of veteran presence that you hope will right the ship.
Fair enough. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Atlanta Football Party your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked On Falcons for your second listen, and be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're also free and available wherever you download your podcasts. We'll see you tomorrow on the Atlanta Football Party, the Dogs edition.